Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, we're going to look at some recent Sly Flourish news. I'm going to offer some more thoughts about my Dragonbane game. I've been running Dragonbane. I like it a lot, and I want to talk about some thoughts that I have and some small things that I'm doing to kind of make Dragonbane more appealing to my players. Today's GM tip is a scene target number. What if you could make a single difficulty class number for an entire scene of your game and tell it to the players and not have to have different DCs for all the different things that are going on in a game. We're gonna experiment with this idea. It's not quite a full, like, you should all do this sort of tip, more like we're going to experiment. We're going to talk about that. Today's commentary is not like this. The mental trap that we sometimes get into of imagining a beautiful future of role-playing games or new products that are coming out. And we expect, of course, that product will be exactly the product I want it to be, because how could it not be the product I want it to be? But of course it is not. And then we're sad and disappointed. We're going to talk about how to navigate that little bit of mental space. And we're going to cover more questions from the Patreon Q&A, all today in the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. Last week on Sly Flourish, I released the article, Your Own Prep Framework. This article was released both as a newsletter. If you're not part of the newsletter, please subscribe, and that way you can get articles like this sent directly to your inbox. And was also last week's Readings and Reflections, the dedicated podcast for Hero Tier subscribers of the Sly Flourish Patreon. You get to hear me read this article aloud and then talk more about it, get into some of the nitty-gritty and some of the background behind the article. The article itself talked about the importance of being able to build your own prep framework. That one of the things that makes the 8 steps from Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master so popular is that it is both a clear framework for how to prep your game, but also a flexible one that allows you to change things to fit you and your group and the RPG you're playing and the situation that you're running for your different scenarios. You can tailor it. And so I talk about the importance of building your own framework, and particularly how to evaluate your framework so you know if it's working well for you. Taking an angle on the scientific method of, first learn new ideas, then prep using some of those ideas, then run using some of those ideas, and then evaluate how well your prep worked for what you ran, and then going back and cycle again, learn more and do that. And so you're iterating through your process of figuring out the prep that works well for you. So that was last week's article called Your Own Prep Framework. Next week's article, which is, if you're listening to the podcast or watching the YouTube video, is available right now on the Sly Flourish website, is called the Lazy Campaign Building Checklist. So I've been thinking a lot about the 8 steps, and I've been thinking about how we use it for our campaigns and things like that. And I just recently started 2 new campaigns in the same week, which I don't recommend. I talked about this on a previous show. I don't recommend starting 2 new campaigns with 2 new systems in the same week. That was hard, and I'm still catching up. Like I'm still spending time learning the systems that we're running, because we're running 2 systems that I'd never run before, Dragonbane and Daggerheart. And it's been a fair bit, but it helped me refine the process for doing lazy campaign planning. And this is something where people have talked about, Return is really good at helping you per session, but it doesn't really talk about doing campaign building. And so this is like, well, when you're doing campaign building, what are the steps? And it kind of breaks it into phases. Your initial campaign planning, your pre-session 0 campaign planning, your session 0, running your session 0, after your session 0, and then building the world out from there. So that kind of covers that. So that article is going to be out on the Sly Flourish website on Monday. It's probably already Monday when you hear this, so it'll be there then. And will also be emailed out to the Sly Flourish newsletter on Tuesday. So if you have not subscribed to the Sly Flourish newsletter, please do so. And that way you don't have to be reminded about these things. You will get them sent directly to your inbox every week, along with other cool things. A whole adventure building PDF that you get free for signing up. And it will be this coming week's Readings and Reflections podcast for Hero Tier subscribers on the Sly Flourish Patreon. Really, really fun. So those are the last 2 articles. Last week, I released 16 chapters of a new product that I'm working on, and I really wanted to get good feedback from folks. I've already gotten a lot of really good feedback from folks. 2 Sly Flourish patrons, Hero Tier subscribers of the Sly Flourish Patreon have gotten this sneak peek. If you are a Hero Tier subscriber or you join up now, you can still get access to it. You get a Hero Tier reward page, and on that page it talks about this new project. I am not naming the project yet. I don't, it's too delicate. I don't want to, put any fractures in it by giving it a clear name yet. I want to kind of just enjoy the content. But if you start reading these chapters, you will have a pretty good idea what this thing is about. And, I really, it's built on 8 years of experience with lots of different things, and I want to get a lot of different viewpoints and different looks at the kind of stuff that's in there to make sure, because I want it to be a 100-year book, right? I want this thing that I'm making to be a product that is useful beyond my lifetime. And to do that, I need to get lots of input and try it out and really look like, would it have been useful 50 years ago to have this? That will give you a good idea if it's useful 50 years from now. So, check that out. Pixel says, I like surprises. I'll wait for the final form. Totally legitimate. Absolutely legitimate to wait until it's done. That's great. So, totally good as well. And I appreciate those who want to dive in and help, right? I just want to get viewpoints. I want to get, I've done these with all these kinds of projects that I've worked on. I've really done them with an open door of trying to hear how people are running their games, how they prep their games, what kind of trouble they run into. Especially now we have so many new people. Like, here's a weird bit, right? When Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master came out, I think it was like 2018. If you take the total number of people playing RPGs today, most of them started playing after that book was published. Right? That's pretty wild. Because what that means is that if the book was built on ideas that many GMs experienced, most of those experiences now have happened after the book was written. And I don't expect to be able to capture all of that. That's a lot of different views and a lot of different experience. But I definitely try to keep my eyes open in this hobby and try to hear how people are playing it and see the games that they're running and see the troubles that they're running into. And, I want to hear people's, views, but then also hear it in the context of what I'm putting out to say like, yes, this is really useful. I really like this. And I think it is. Like, I'll be honest, like I'm going through my second draft now, right? That's how I'm releasing it. I wrote it all up late last quarter, from basically September to December last year. I wrote this thing. It's about 85,000 words, 42 chapters plus appendices. And wrote it. It felt like pretty quick. Like I was hammering out words because it's something I think about a lot. And it's pretty, and it's the kind of work that the easiest for me to write and get down. So writing was easy. And now I'm going through my second draft. There's definitely been things where I'm like, I need to rework that. Like, that's not working, right? This isn't working. And sometimes they're big structural things. Right? I don't know if this whole idea works, right? Like, I really got to go back. But one thing is like practical applicability is like, key for this thing. And I really want to make sure that when we look at this, that it's practically applicable, that this is stuff that you could definitely just use, right? Just use at their table. And I really want to focus on that. And I think it's hitting that mark in a lot of places. Like one thing that you'll note about this thing is it's got random tables everywhere, hundreds, maybe not hundreds, dozens and dozens of random tables and thousands of random elements that are on all angles and all kinds of things, right? So it's really, in that degree, I think it could be very useful. So I'm very excited for it, but I'm also very eager to hear people's feedback on it and tell me what I've been asking for the folks that have been looking at it, or what needs to be in here that isn't here, that really needs to be here. And what's in here that does not need to be in here? What's the stuff that needs to be killed? I killed whole, and people notice like, hey, the chapter numbers jump. And I'm like, that's because I killed an entire chapter. There was a chapter there. I don't need it. There's actually at least 2 chapters, right? Where it's like 5,000 words, right? 6,000 words of material. Then I'm like, yeah, I don't need these, right? It's not helpful. It's not helpful, not helping. But then there's other ones where I'm like, I think this is really, really handy. So I'm really trying to like pour all of my, as they say in The Godfather, all of my knowledge and all of my skills, I'm trying to pour into this one thing so that you will have the embodiment of my experiences and the experiences of all of those I've been able to channel and capture in one thing. So that's very exciting. So I'm very excited about it. I'm nervous about it, obviously. You can tell because I'm talking a lot. But I think it's very exciting. Anyway, if you want to see what the hell I'm talking about, the way to do it is join the Sly Flourish Patreon. Become a hero tier member of the Sly Flourish Patreon. Very affordable. I keep my tiers very low price. And a hero tier subscriber, you get not just that, you get like the 5e artisanal database. You get 20 scenarios for City of Arches. You get there's a dozen other adventures, tons of stuff that you get for being a patron of Sly Flourish. It's a really good deal. And you get access to this. And it's very valuable to me too, because I get your feedback to help build an awesome product. Dragonbane. So I've been running, we'll probably do something like this next week for Daggerheart. I'll talk more about my Daggerheart game, but my Daggerheart game was last week and not this week. And I will be, this coming Friday, I will be running a Daggerheart game. So we'll probably do, I think, kind of, I'm not going to say like regular, but kind of, every so often as I am exploring these systems and learning them, I think it's kind of useful to offer up tips on what I've learned running these systems. And then maybe some tips on like what we can do that we can bring to other games. So Dragonbane, I have been running Dragonbane now. We've probably had more than a half a dozen sessions, I would say. So I'm not super experienced with I'm going to screw up Dragonbane and Daggerheart so often. I'm sorry. I apologize ahead of time. Dragonbane. This is Dragonbane, Mike. Remember Dragonbane. So I'm not like super experienced running Dragonbane. I've played a bunch of games. I've now run a bunch of games, and my players have now run a bunch of games, and we're definitely getting into the flow. We know the system now, right? And it's a great, easy to learn system. There's parts of Dragonbane I absolutely love. I really love rolling under. I really love that there's like no plus modifiers on die rolls. You roll a die, and from the answer on the roll, if you succeeded or not. The only trick is it's roll under. So you have to remember that low rolls are good. Once you get wired into the idea that low rolls are good, rolling is really straightforward and easy. It also means that like turn order and stuff like that goes quickly because there's not a lot. You're not rolling 5, 6, 7 times a turn. You're rolling once. You're doing a thing. And I really like that too. That's really powerful. From a GM standpoint, I find it very straightforward to run. I really like... I really like how it plays out. I don't find any real difficulty in running it. I will say I'm not a fan, and I'll talk about this a little bit, that I'm not that much of a fan of all of the adventures that are inside the adventure campaign book that comes with the core set. And I think I picked my two least favorites are the first two I ran. And so that was unfortunate. And I'll talk about those and why I didn't like them. And this is my opinion more than it is saying that these things are bad. One of them I think really could have used better work. The other one I think is like a style that didn't really fit what I kind of want. And then there's other ones where I did a better job of reading them and saying like, okay, which ones do I absolutely want to run? And which of these I'm like, I could do without. And then which might be optional ones, right? So we'll talk about that. So a couple of things. Probably the number one experience that I've had with Dragonbane, and this is coming from a group who just finished a 20-level 5e game. So these are crunchy players. Now, they are not power gamers. I get people who say, oh, your group is a total bunch of power gamers. They are not. They are not power gamers. They are heavy roleplay people. They know the mechanics of the game. They play the system that's in front of them, but they are not what I would say to be optimizers, right? They don't go optimizing their characters. And but they liked having all of the options that they had when they were running high-level 5e games, right? These are players that are now used to having lots of options. And certainly early on in Dragonbane, you don't have a lot of options. You're throwing a sling bolt at a guy. You're hitting them with a staff. And when I talked to some of the players who seemed to enjoy, I talked to my players about it. I kind of talked to them individually and a little bit as a group. And the general consensus I got from a couple of people was, it's fun for a short campaign, but I wouldn't run a long campaign in it. Right, that's feedback I got from a couple. I had one player, and this player is very funny, who he made a funny statement. He said, what, I've only been playing for 5 years, so it's nice to play a system where all of us are kind of on an even path, because I always feel like everybody else knows everything about this game other than I do. And I laughed because I'm like, dude, you've been playing weekly for 5 years, right? Like you're not a newbie, right? Like you know as well. I mean, we're all struggling with a lot of things, and then particularly he played for 2 years, more than 2 years. In a campaign where he had multiple versions of 5e at the table, right? So like, that's like the deep end of the pool. But but his point was like, the rest of you have been playing 5e for 10 years, and I have not. Like, this is my first role-playing game was 5e, but and it wasn't for you guys, so you knew a lot more about it. But now we're all learning together, and I like that part of it. So that was his point, that he really liked part of it, and he liked the other things. I had other players who are they like the system, they like the roll under, they like how initiative works. There's lots of stuff that they like. But I tell you, they like it now, and it's because I made one change, and there's probably a change I would make up front. And I would recommend this if you want a more high heroic fantasy version of Dragonbane. And some people will immediately like scoff and are yelling at their phones and YouTube screens and stuff like that, or in their cars banging on the steering wheel in traffic, saying like, Dragonbane is not a high heroic fantasy RPG. It is a folk heroic fantasy RPG. You're not meant to be superheroes, right? You're not meant to be these like super powerful creatures. This is not 13th Age. But I can tell you from my players, like the enjoyment of the players and the enjoyment of the group, one feature that I gave them pretty early on, and then I would almost think about giving it to them maybe within the first set, maybe right away, as the fancy footwork and defensive heroic abilities. So one of the things about how, and I talked about this previously, but one of the things in Dragonbane is if you want to try to evade or parry an attack, it essentially uses your action to do so. You have to move your point in the initiative forward and then decide if you want to evade or parry an attack by getting rid of your action. It's not as unbalanced as it seems because turns don't take nearly as long. So you're ripping through turns so quickly that it's not like 5e where you're going to do nothing and the guy next to you is going to have 5 actions, right? Which is what 5e. The guy next to you also doesn't have a lot of things going on. So it really doesn't slow things down. It doesn't remove your ability to do things so much. But boy, it's a big negative beat. And it's a big negative beat, particularly if you say, I'm going to use my action to evade, and then you fail the evade and take damage anyway. Now you feel like now I lost my action and I didn't need to, right? So that was a big kind of downward beat for people. And most of my players were kind of bothered by this. So what I did is I gave them the option to take a heroic ability early. I gave them a heroic ability at in the middle of an adventure. I had a scene where they like fought some wooden soldiers, and by fighting the wooden soldiers, they learned new defensive techniques and they were able to pick it up. And what I told them is you can take any heroic ability, but I highly recommend you take either fancy footwork or defensive. One of them gives you the ability to evade without using your action to do so. The other one lets you parry without taking an action to do so. You burn willpower instead. So it's not without cost. I would probably, if I were running Dragonbane again with a group who were used to more high heroic fantasy RPGs like D&D 5e, I would probably give them that ability up front. And I don't think it breaks the game to do so. It definitely makes them more powerful because they are going to use it a lot. And when you have monsters who are making multiple attacks per turn, and they're changing who they're going to attack, it means a lot of those attacks are going to be evaded. They're not going to take damage. But also their hit points are pretty low too. So I have not found it to be unbalancing that they have that. So giving that early, I don't think is a big deal. And I think immediately takes the theme of Dragonbane from folk heroic to high heroic fantasy, if that's what you're looking for. Something else is, I think it's important as a GM, this is something I started doing myself. It's important as a GM for me to keep track of which heroic abilities the characters have so that I can tug on those heroic abilities during the game. And an example is we have a scholar. One of the players is playing a scholar, and the scholar has an ability to it's like, I call it like super myths and legends or super awareness. It's essentially because they're a scholar, they can burn some will points and ask a question and get a legitimate answer. And it's sort of like a free, successful, insight check kind of thing. And I forget that they have it, and sometimes they forget they have it, or they don't realize that the situation that's going on in the game could benefit from that ability. And I want to know it's there so I could say, by the way, if you want to use your thing, you may learn more about this. Because it's a great opportunity for me to dump secrets and clues on them. It's a great way for me to propel the game forward and make the game more fun by them using the ability that they have for that's like a key ability of their character. That it's like it doesn't do anything in combat, so they're not really paying a lot of attention to it in combat and stuff like that. And then everything else, they're rolling checks all the time. And you want to be like, hey, you could use that instead. The merchant, we have a merchant in our group who has the ability to find the nearest valuable treasure. And I want to have sort of a thing where, because I remember that they have this, I want to be able to say, oh, because you have this thing, you're feeling a ping somewhere. You don't know where yet, but there's treasure here. There's something valuable here. And I could have used this in my last game. And the funny thing is, in the last game, the most valuable thing was a giant pile of dragon dung. And they could have detected the dragon dung. Turned out it had very useful magical properties. They could have detected that by using their treasure thing, which would have been hysterical because they would have used their treasure thing to find a giant pile of shit. Right? That would have been really funny. But I didn't do it because I didn't have it in mind. So I want to keep those heroic abilities in front of me for each of the characters so I know to tug on them at the right spot in the game. I'm not a fan of all of the adventures. I want to talk a little bit about it. These are the adventure notes that I have. So there's a series of adventures. So here's the table of contents to the various adventures that are inside the adventure campaign book that comes with Dragonbane. I had mentioned before, the Dragonbane core box set was my product of 2025. I loved it because it was just so much stuff for such a reasonable price. And I still agree with that. Like, even though I'm not crazy about all the adventures in here, I still agree with that. So what I've been doing is I read through all of the adventures to kind of decide which adventures I wanted to run and which ones I had run. And I started off by running Road's End Inn, which I found to be kind of a mess. I found that there wasn't really a clear, coherent story for the adventure. There were things mentioned like certain curses, but there wasn't a description of what the curses did or what the there wasn't really an explanation for how to break them. So I ended up having to rewrite a lot of that. And when I talked to my wife who played in it and the other players, they were like, "Oh, it was great. Like, it was fine. Like, the story was really interesting. I really liked the story." I'm like, "Yeah, it's because I made it." Like, I went back and added the story. So, like, I'm glad they enjoyed it. I didn't feel like it served me particularly well. And then I came up with this whole sort of like time traveling thing where, the characters were stuck in time in their worst moments of their lives where they were suffering the most pain, and it was the curse that they had, stuff like that. Well, then it turned out the next one they were going to was called The Village of the Day Before, which also does time travel. Now, the cool thing was I kind of tied the arc together that the character in Road's End Inn, who is an old woman who was accused of having murdered a child, that she was chained up and died in a cellar. And I had it where she was so mad about this. She was legitimately falsely accused, but she was a delver into witchcraft and stuff, that she called a demon forth to give her revenge. And that demon was a demon called Ix. I've used the word Ix, and it is a demon name in multiple games, and they use it in here. I'm like, well, it's called Ix again. And they're like, wasn't Ix the name of the aboleth in that thing? I'm like, yes, it was, because I like Ix. Ix is also the name of the planet in Dune, the Ixians. Anyway, so I tied the two adventures together, and that way it made sense that there was this time traveling loop sort of things. But the other one was Village of the Day Before. And Village of the Day Before is a Groundhog Day style adventure. It actually reminds me very much of the Tom Cruise. So from the Tom Cruise movie, Edge of Tomorrow, it's very much like the Tom Cruise movie, Edge of Tomorrow, where essentially there is a 1 hour time loop. And in that loop, the characters have to go do some stuff and figure it out before 5 dragons breathe and destroy the whole village. Now, the first session was kind of frustrating for the players because they said, well, okay, we're going to immediately go do these things. Like, we know where we got to go, and they couldn't get up there in time, and they learned a bunch of things, but they immediately got killed by the dragons, and they were very sad. So, yeah, Scipio brings up that the original name of that story was from a manga called All You Need Is Kill, which is a pretty wild name. Anyway, so Village of the Day Before is the same sort of thing. And there's like a bunch of things you learn. And the players figured it out their second time through. And they learned there's a lot of interesting things. There's little bubbles where time doesn't move. There's the dragon dung where you can, if you apply it to yourself liberally, you can move really fast. And there is like a pie that you could use to give to a troll. And what was fun is that one of the players has a thing of like they are foodies. And so they're like, they couldn't resist eating the pie rather than giving it to the troll, but then found another way to get up in the tower. Anyway, we solved the whole adventure in 2 sessions. And I think now when they look back, they go, yeah, that was fun. But the first one of it was kind of frustrating. I wouldn't say that I don't recommend it. I would read them before I would run it. And to decide for yourself if you think a Groundhog Day style adventure is where you want to go. Because it's a little too thematic for me, right? I've played in Groundhog Day style adventures where GMs thought that they were doing something really fun. And in reality, it was just kind of gitchy, right? It was like, it's too built around this one theme that we all kind of know because we've all seen Groundhog Day, right? And I just want an adventure. Like, I just want to, go do things. And so I was looking at these other ones to say, like, which other ones am I interested in doing and which ones am I not interested in doing? And I kind of made a list. So the first thing I decided is like the whole theme of the campaign is that there's these 3 pieces of the statue that you want to acquire in order to get to a final tomb, yada, yada, yada. So I was like, where are they? Well, they got the first one on the village of the day before. And then I was like, I'm going to put 2 others. I'm going to put one in Ritter Mound and one in both Hild's Lode are going to be the other 2. So that way there's like 3 places that they can go to, one of which they've already done and 2 of which they have to go. Then the adventures, I was like, these are the ones that I really like. The good adventures are Ritter Mound and Both Hild's Lode. Both sounded really good. And I really like those. And you can see I was like, is there a piece here? And then there were some side adventures. I'm like, I like these 2 and I want to run them. But they're not really, they don't have to be part of the main story. And that was Temple of Purple Flame, which I hinted at recently. The Tower of Sighs, which was like, it's okay. Oracle Cave, which is the spiders and kidnap kids. I thought that was fun. Deadeye's Cave with a basilisk. I thought that was fun too. And then the adventures I didn't want to run were the Troll Spire. And the reason I didn't really like the Troll Spire one is it was kind of weird how you got in there. And then in the bottom, there's this goofy ass puzzle. And we all know how I feel about puzzles. I'm not going to talk about puzzles today, but I wasn't a big fan. I'm like, why did they make this puzzle? Who put it here and why? What purpose does it serve? It wasn't for me, right? So I'm like, I think I'm going to skip it because like trying to figure out what that puzzle room is and then get the players to figure it out and not get frustrated. That sounded like a pain in the ass. So I'm like, I don't think I'm going to run that one. And then the other one was Fort Malice. And I didn't really like that one because there was too much sort of moral ambiguity about these dragon knights forcing, kidnapping people and forcing them to break into different things. And I'm like, unless I'm putting the puzzle piece there, I don't really need it. So I was like, of these adventures, I don't think that those 2 are ones that I want to particularly run. So I'm glad that I went through and read at least enough of the adventures to be able to determine whether or not they're for me or not for me, and then figure out where the puzzle pieces or the statue pieces are going to be, and so on and so forth. But I wanted to offer that up as like, hey, take a look at the adventures to decide which ones you really dig. So another little trick that I want to try, one of the things to remember about Dragonbane, which also is an issue with Daggerheart as well, since I'm kind of running both of them, I'm learning more about both of them, is with Dragonbane, character advancement comes when they roll a 1 or a 20 on a skill check. So on any given skill check that they roll, if they roll 10% of the time, they're going to roll 1 or 20, and that means they can mark it and potentially increase that skill. So if you call for a lot of checks, they're going to advance faster. And sometimes you don't want to necessarily call for a check in order to have something happen. Now, they have a thing in the game called passive checks, but even their passive checks, you still roll on them. It's a passive check is essentially when you ask a player to roll on a thing to determine it. And I don't know that a boon or a bane, I don't know if they get a dragon or a demon, or which is a 1 or a 20, that they will advance it. But I want to try something even different. I want to write down the score that different characters have for certain things, particularly for awareness. Awareness is sort of the perception of Dragonbane. And I did write down their awareness for everybody. So then I can look down, and when there are certain things that I think somebody should notice, the people who have the people who have higher awareness are the ones who are most likely to see it. And that way I can use it as sort of a passive awareness check, the same way you have passive perception in 5e. And that way I can use it for the same reason that passive perception was a thing in 5e, which is a way to kind of give information to the characters without them having to constantly roll nonstop. I think it matters a little bit more because there are times where I would want them to know something and I want somebody to know it. And instead of having everybody roll and everybody fail, because they all know if they failed, I can instead say, oh, you know it, you have a 14, so you're pretty aware and you can see that this thing is going on. So you can essentially say like, you can give a static value to something being noticed and then figure out who noticed it and who didn't based on their passive awareness scores. Not something that the game has, but it's a little trick that I think I'm going to use to try to keep track of that kind of stuff. Another thing I want to keep track of with characters. So I mentioned that I want to keep track of the heroic abilities. So I know to drop little tugs on them about when they can use those, particularly for heroic abilities that are not combat based. The players aren't necessarily looking at their sheet. They're not going to remember that, hey, your heroic ability can really help you here. I want to give little pings out to them like, hey, that might work. The other one is weaknesses. So characters all have a weakness. And I want to keep track of those weaknesses so I can put situations in the game where those weaknesses can come out, because when they use a weakness in the game, that gives them another opportunity to increase a skill value at the end of a session. My sessions are actually pretty short, by the way, so we're rolling those pretty often. And they get 5 a check, so the characters are actually progressing relatively quickly, which is fine. But I want to help them with this weakness bit. So that's something I want to keep track of with the characters, and something I would recommend. So if you've got like your list of characters in front of you, note what are their heroic abilities, so you can throw little hints out at those. What's their passive awareness, so that you can give information out as they see it, and what weaknesses they have, so they can give them or let them know that there are opportunities for them to use their weakness. That's an opportunity. You're giving prompts back and forth, and I think that's something you can do. So overall, now that I'm 6-7 sessions into Dragonbane, I have opinions, and I still love it very much, right? I really like. It's so funny because I think I would be pretty happy. I said this about Dolmenwood too, and I talked about Dolmenwood a few weeks ago. Like, if this was the RPG that we had, I would be really happy with it. And it's the only problem I have is I don't think my players are as excited about it as I am, mostly because they liked the having more high heroic characters, right? I think that they got used to having lots of different character options, and I think that that's something that they really enjoy. I would certainly say Dragonbane is definitely meatier than your typical OSR game. It is still lethal. It's actually not as lethal as it seems. You can drop to 0 pretty quickly, but there are lots of ways to get hit points back and get back on your feet and running that don't require necessarily healing. So in that case, I think it's actually easier to get on your feet in Dragonbane than it is in 5e, but you have fewer hit points, so you drop pretty quickly. But I definitely feel like I love Dragonbane more than my players do. I wouldn't say that they don't like it. I've talked to them and they're like, no, it's fine. And there are parts of it they very much like. But they are feeling some of the resistance of not being quite as heroic as they want. I have one last thing that I'm going to do, and I started doing, and I'm going to try, is offering even more heroic abilities than I have been. So the general expectation is that you get like 2 or 3 heroic abilities across an entire campaign. But I don't think the game breaks down if you made it even 4 or 5. So up front, if you give like the fancy footwork and defensive heroic ability early, which I think are really, like, most people are going to want those, right? They are really, really beneficial. It's essentially like gaining an extra action. So those are really good ones that people are going to want early. You might just give them to them, right? You might just give them out early. And then the book says, don't give out heroic abilities any more often than once per adventure. They should not get them more often. They shouldn't get multiple ones in an adventure, which means you could get them as often as an adventure. And what I might consider doing is giving more of those options earlier in the game. So like maybe they get 2, 3, or 4 of them in the first 2, 3, 4 adventures. And then you slow down, similar to how they would hit sort of 5th level in D&D, and now you slow down character progression. That you say, now it's every other adventure. But that way they can pick a few of them, and they have more kind of meaty options for their characters to be able to do stuff. Right? Or they've at least made a choice of taking passive ones versus active ones. And they have more things that they can do. And then they might feel a little bit more heroic in the game. They might feel like they have more options to do things in the game. And the game might have longer legs earlier if you start to give more heroic abilities earlier in the game. So I'm probably going to do that. They just finished their second adventure. I just gave them their second heroic ability. So they now have 3 at this point, each. And I'm going to see how that feels. And I might give them a third after the next one. And then after that, I'll probably do like every other one or something like that. And then they're also getting them whenever they hit an 18 with a skill. But so far, nobody's done that. It's actually pretty hard to do that. So that's my overall thoughts on Dragonbane right now. I really like it. It's really fun. I want to, I love it. And I have more Dragonbane stuff, and there's more books on the way that are coming in Kickstarter. So I hope I have more opportunity to play it, because I really, really like this system. My only regret is I wish my players were as excited about it as I am. And I don't feel like that is the case. Another RPG that I've been looking at recently, I had mentioned last week, was Index Card RPG. Index Card RPG by Runehammer Games is a lightweight, I put it on the heroic or high heroic standpoint. I wouldn't say it's like an old school style game, but a dramatically simplified kind of version of your typical RPG. And they had, one of the things that Index Card RPG has, which I really dig, is it mentions in the book, hey, here's some things that work for our game, but also could work for other games too. And one of the ideas in Index Card RPG, where I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting, was the idea of having a single target number for a scene. So imagine you're playing 5e, right? Imagine you're playing your variant of 5e. And instead of, and you have a big, we'll go with like a combat encounter. We'll say there's a combat encounter where there's also like skill things that you can do. It's ability checks that you make to do things. What if you said, for this encounter, there's a flat difficulty check of 18, right? Everything that you're checking against, the score you're checking against is 18. The armor class of everybody, 18. Doesn't matter what kind of monster they are. They have an AC of 18. Everything is an 18. You want to roll an ability check in order to climb a wall and get up to a place? That's an 18. You're making a saving throw versus a breath weapon. That is an 18. Every value that you are rolling against in this scene is an 18. Now, the advantage of that is the players know it and you tell it to them. You don't hide that DC. You tell them what the AC is. So that way, whatever they're doing, the AC or DC is an 18, and they know what it is. The overall scene difficulty is an 18. And the advantage is they know the score. They can roll their dice. They know if they succeeded or failed. They don't need to tell you. And they immediately know like the odds of different things that they're doing. What's interesting about this is it actually is similar to what I was just talking about Dragonbane, where one of the things I love about Dragonbane is the idea that the characters know their target numbers and they can just roll and succeed, right? They roll and succeed, they roll and fail. They know it. They don't have to tell you. And I really like that. Also, if you look at environments in Daggerheart, environments in Daggerheart also have a single target number, right? Whatever thing they're doing, they have a target number that's associated with that environment. And my thought was, couldn't you just expand that out to everything else? ICRPG has this idea of, can you expand it out to anything else? So I kind of dig the idea. I kind of think it is a wild idea. But it abstracts a lot of things. Salicious here in chat says, "Oh my God, does that mean?" I'm paraphrasing, but I think we're on the same page here. Does that mean that climbing a rope gets harder depending on what scene the rope is in? And the answer would be yes, because the rope has a slick residue on it that makes it more difficult. So, but that's the point. Like you're abstracting stuff, right? And when you abstract stuff, you are saying like some things, you're saying like everything's got the same AC. Now, one thing that ICRPG recommends is they have a thing where some things could be easier and some things could be hard. And in that case, you could say you have a +3 or -3 on this check, right? So if they are doing like a rope and saying, can I climb? I really like climbing the rope. You can say that's going to be easier. So you're +3 on that check. It's still an 18, but you get +3 because that's easier to do. You could also just say, I'm going to give you advantage on it, right? You could just throw advantage and disadvantage as your ways of saying this thing is particularly easy or particularly hard. You could just offer advantage and disadvantage as your way of dealing with that. Players love advantage and disadvantage. So it's it still makes it so that the target number doesn't change. And now that you're not giving another bonus, you're just letting him roll another die. So that would be a way that you could sort of take this general target number and still say like, it's climbing a rope is easy, so go ahead and roll with advantage, right? That would probably be my approach for saying like, you're not having a flat DC for everything else. Chronophil says, is that what Numenera does? And it's very similar to what Numenera does, right? Numenera also has target numbers. And if you can tell, one of the things I do a lot when I'm running 5e is try to turn it into Numenera, because I love Numenera. I think Numenera is the easiest system I have ever GM'd. And I kind of want every game to be like Numenera. Right now, not everybody does. Right? Certainly, that is a Mike Shea thing. That is not I think all of them should be. Right. In my opinion, I'm always trying to get back to that. Forge of Foes is a way to kind of make 5e monsters closer to what you have in Numenera. All you need is a challenge number, right? And in the same way that this idea of like, hey, this scene has a general difficulty number, we're all going to roll against that. So the advantage is it's super fast to adjudicate, right? It simplifies your design. You don't have to apply a bunch of DCs to stuff. So you can just, hey, everything's an 18, right? The players know what they're aiming for. But you lose a lot of resolution in a game that typically has a lot of resolution. And even when I talk about it being like Dragonbane, it's not really like Dragonbane because everybody's skills in Dragonbane are different. So they're rolling against different target numbers depending on what they're doing and depending on which character is doing it. And you're not really doing that here. But that idea of like really every monster in this, whether it's the lowliest minion or the highest super powerful monster, has the same armor class. Is that too much of an abstraction? And we're like, well, we're kind of already abstracting armor class by turning it into a number in the first place, right? We've already said like, hey, a breastplate, a fighter with full plate armor and a shield is kind of the same as a relatively dexterous wizard who has the armor spell and uses the shield cantrip. Or not a shield cantrip. God, if it was a cantrip, I'd throw myself off a building. The shield spell. So we're already abstracting stuff, but that's kind of a question. This is where you want to talk to your players and say, how do you guys feel about it? And what I want to do, and I'm going to do today in a short amount of time, is I'm going to ask my players, hey, how would you feel about this? You know, how would you feel if we tried out using a static number for everything in the scene? I want to try it out and see what it's like. And we'll see, right? We'll see how that plays out. Do people feel like, because this is one of those, like, I have a philosophy, I have a theory, and I've tested this theory a lot. And in my experience, the theory is pretty sound. It's not necessarily sound for everybody, but it's sound for me. And the theory is the things that players care about are their characters. Players care about their characters. They really don't care that much about anything else that's going on in the game. The whole game for them is the interface of their characters with the things happening in the world. I don't know that they give that much of a crap about the mechanics of anything outside of the character, which means you don't really need a lot of those mechanics. And that's why I had a patron question. I answered it. It'll probably show up on the show again later, where somebody said, like, hey, I've been running Forge. I know you ran Forge of Foes monsters for your game. Did you really run Forge of Foes monsters all the way up to 20th level? And the answer was yes. And did it matter? No. Nobody cared that the Pit Fiend and the Balor had the same stats, exact same stats. The flavor was different, right? How I talked about it was different, but they really didn't care, right? And it's because they're busy worrying about their characters. They're not really worried about the mechanics of the monsters that much. So I feel like you can get away abstracting a lot and people don't care. Does it really matter that one monster has an armor class of 18 and another one has a 16? Not really. Right? Or one has a 21 and one has a 19. Not really. Like 5 differences, probably, a difference of 5 or more, that one makes a big difference. And sometimes you'll have monsters where you're like, yeah, this monster's really like the big flabby zombie monster, right? Well, big flabby zombie monsters, they don't have armor classes of 20. So you don't put a DC 20 on that one. Or that one you would say, since you're fighting a giant flabby zombie monster, all the attacks have advantage against it. Players will love that, right? I don't know any player that's like, would you be willing to sacrifice 10 points on armor class in order to have advantage on a roll? I bet you they'd say, I'll take advantage, even though it's way worse, right? But also, you don't have to use it all the time, right? The idea is you could say, actually, for this guy, it's a 10. It's so different that we're going to give a different armor class to this guy, right? That would be a way to do it. So I feel like this idea could work. I haven't tested it yet. This is one of those experimental tips. This is a tip where I'm like, hey, maybe this works, right? And ICRPG clearly uses it, so it kind of works there. I've played Numenera. I know it works there. I know what the feeling is like when we look at Daggerheart and Dragonbane, so maybe it works there. And I'm going to try it today. And then maybe I'll come back and say, hey, I tried this, and wow, it really worked well. Or wow, my players hated it. Wow, that was a huge mistake, and I am so sorry for offering that recommendation. But that is a feeling I've got about using a scene target number. So I'm curious of your thoughts. What do you think about using a scene target number? Is that an abstraction is that too much of an abstraction for you? Or do you feel like, yeah, hey, anything I can do to simplify my life as a GM, I want to do, and scene target number is a way to do it. So I spend a fair bit of time reading about the TTRPG industry, reading players talking about their games, reading lots of people talking about different systems that are coming out. And I spent a lot of time in EN World. I really like EN World. It's a fun place to hang out, fun place to listen to people's commentaries and talk to a lot of other folks. And there is a trend that I see. And I talked about this trend a little bit in a different commentary in a previous show about the idea that, in my opinion, there are no good, it's rare to find RPG products that are truly good or truly bad. And instead, they are things that are either for us or not for us. Right? That there's a degree of like, hey, that's not for me, right? And there's a lot of power in saying, yeah, that's not for me, right? That style is not for me, or that game system is not for me, or that adventure style is not for me. Instead of saying that one is bad. And you get a lot of people. I've had really fun, interesting. I had one person who literally said, well, in my opinion, this adventure is objectively bad. And I was like, my head hurts, right? So we definitely get that. And one of the things I try to do is like, there are games out there that are not for me. Now, the funny thing is I love RPGs overall. I really love all of them. And I would play every RPG, right? I would be happy playing anything. There are certain ones I don't want to run. And there are certain ones that I wouldn't want to run for a long time or play in a long campaign. But I'd play anything, right? I'd certainly play anything in a one shot and enjoy them a lot. But I also recognize that there are people who are like, I really don't like that style of game. There are some people who really don't like the super heroic nature of like D&D 5e or Pathfinder 2 or other super heroic fantasy RPGs. And there are other people who really don't want to get killed the first time they're shot with a goblin, shot by an arrow from a goblin. So there's lots of different styles of RPGs that different people resonate with. And that's very cool. Another element to this, though, is the thinking about RPGs in the future. Hey, there's new games coming out. There's new systems coming out. There are companies that are or are not working on different things. And what ends up happening is people say things like, and I'm going to bring up an example. I've heard from multiple people in different groups and different forums, I really wish Wizards of the Coast would make a new 6th edition, right? And what I find interesting about that is you can't imagine that they would say, I really wish Wizards would make a new 6th edition, but I bet I won't like it, right? They're not going to say that because the 6th edition that may or may not ever get made isn't going to be the way you think it is, right? But you imagine it's going to be the kind of 6th edition you want, right? I have an imagination of what I would like to see in a future RPG, right? Future Wizards of the Coast D&D version. And it's actually a lot more like Shadowdark, right? But I already have Shadowdark. Now, I also don't know that I need the super lethal version of Shadowdark. I think there's a way to do a simplified high heroic fantasy RPG that I would really dig. So maybe something more like 13th Age. I don't even know. The point is that, when we see, and I literally heard something, I'm making up part of this, but I heard something that was very close to this on an EN World post where somebody said that I really wish WotC would make a new version of D&D. And it should be classless and levelless, and spells should be done differently. And and I'm making this part up, and they should use tarot cards instead of dice, right? But I've definitely heard where people are like, I want a new version of D&D that's classless and levelless. And you're like, that would be such a terrible idea, right? And it's terrible because D&D is the only RPG that has to still be D&D at the end of the day. Every other RPG can do anything they want to make a game and have, right? And if you look at the widespread nature of games that we have, the only one that needs to have like ability scores and have the 6 ability scores and probably have classes and probably have levels and probably have species is D&D. And that's because it's the only one that's been around for 50 years, right? It has to do all of that. And the other thing that always frustrates me with stuff like this is there's also other games that are classless and levelless and use tarot cards instead of dice. Why don't you play those, right? Oh, no, it needs to be D&D. Wizards needs to do it because it needs to be D&D. And that gets frustrating. But my point is that, like, in the end, when you get the thing you get, what you're going to say is, well, not like that, right? And that's where the topic comes up. Not like that. The topic is you want something, and then it comes out and you're like, well, not like that. An example would be, I want, and I'm kind of picking on some people here, and I apologize for it ahead of time, but the conversation of like, do we want to have a new campaign setting? Wizards of the Coast to put out a brand new campaign setting. And then you ask, like, well, what about Ravnica? No, I didn't like Ravnica. What about Theros? No, I didn't like Theros. What about Strixhaven? I didn't like Strixhaven. Well, what about what they did with Wild Beyond the Wishway? No, I didn't like that one either. So you're like, okay, so the last 5 ones that they did, you didn't like, but the new one that comes out, that's going to be the one, right? Not like that, right? I want that, but not like that, right? That's the thing. And I suffer from this, right? Because one of the things that we do is we have in our minds what we want, particularly for a big company like that, where we look at the Forgotten Realms books. And I talked about, I did a spotlight on the Forgotten Realms books. By the way, as a disclaimer, I have worked with Wizards of the Coast before. Wizards of the Coast has paid me in the past. All disclaimers of all my things. I have been in contact with Wizards of the Coast. I talk to them pretty regularly. So, keep that in mind with all of my statements about it. But I think you also know where I'm coming from with a lot of the things that I say. And like when I did my spotlight on the Forgotten Realms books, one of the things I said was like, I really wish they had done X, Y, and Z, right? Like, I wish it was one book. I wish it was as dense as the Eberron book. And I wish they had covered certain territories that they didn't cover and didn't continually cover the same places that have been covered over and over in the past. So what did I say? Not like that. Like, I wanted a Forgotten Realms book, but not like that. So I am suffering the same. We're all together in this issue of not like that, right? That we want a thing, but that thing is never exactly what we want. And I do it with RPGs. The RPG I am most in love with, the RPG I love the most, is the one I have not yet played. And that's because once I start playing an RPG, I get nitpicky. I loved Daggerheart. Whoa, so much until I started playing it. And now I'm not saying I don't love it anymore or that I don't think it's good anymore. But now I'm like, that's weird. Like, why is it doing that? Why are there 3 different bands of range of abstract distances that are within 15 feet of each other? Right? That's called squares, right? We don't need bands. We need squares. So as soon as I start playing an RPG, I start hitting against the things that don't make it perfect. And then I'm like, it's not like that. So what do we do with this? Right? Okay, Mike, great. So what you've shown is that our future, when we look at things in the future, when we imagine what they're going to be, it turns out they're not like what we thought they were. No duh. And also, what good is that? And I would say, like, I fall back to the same kind of idea of like, love the one you're with. Instead of assuming that the thing that's on the horizon that either has or has not happened yet, instead of assuming that that is going to be the thing that is going to be great, look at the things we have right now. The campaign settings we have right now, the games we have right now, the systems, all the tools, the accessories. And even though they're not exactly what we want, love them for what they have, because we can make this game whatever we want. You can do whatever you want. You can take your Forgotten Realms Adventures in Faerun book over here and your 3rd edition Forgotten Realms book and mash them together and get the places that you want. Because I guarantee you if it's in the Forgotten Realms, it's been covered. You can say, I really wish that we would have new campaign settings. Or you could say, you know what? Let me take a look at the Southlands book that Kobold Press came out. Or let me pick up that Ardenvool Mega Dungeon that I hadn't looked at before and picked up on the Bundle of Holding. I think it's still going on. I don't know if that Bundle of Holding is still going on or not. But, hey, it's dirt cheap. I could look at Dolmenwood. Look at the Dolmenwood campaign. What would it be like to take that? What if I took the index card RPG science fiction game system, which I think is fun, but set it in Numenera? So I have the world of Numenera, which I love and my players love, but with a system that my players might like more. We get to make anything we want, right? All of these things. I'm surrounded by books and I can modify them however I want. I can write my own RPG system. I can write my own set of house rules. I can come up with my own modified campaign setting. We can customize things however we want for us and our group, instead of waiting for external forces to magically suck from our brains the perfect system for us, or RPG or campaign setting or adventure type, and bring them down to us. We can do them ourselves. Because the reality is there is no perfect one, right? There's no perfect system. There's no perfect adventure format. There's no perfect campaign setting, right? All of these things have elements to it that are not going to fit. Instead, we all have our preferences of the things that we want. But in this hobby, and in many hobbies, that wouldn't matter. If you were playing, I like to pick on Destiny 2, right? I haven't played Destiny 2 in years. But if you're playing like a massive online game, World of Warcraft or Destiny 2, you don't get to decide, well, you know what? I didn't like how they handled hunters. Or I didn't like what they did with that one new thing. I'm going to change it. You can't do that with most video games, right? I mean, you can mod Skyrim. You can turn all the dragons into cheese, right, in Skyrim, or have Randy Macho Man Savage replace all of the voice acting work of the dragons, which is hysterical, by the way. You can change a lot. Sometimes, but maybe not. But in this game, at our tables, we can do anything we want. So remember that the game is ours. We own the game, right? We bought them. We own them. They're at our table. We can modify it however we want. We can house rule everything into perfection. It's rare to find a long-term GM who doesn't also have an RPG system that they've been writing on the side. Almost everyone has. I've written multiple, and the nice thing is all mine are like 1 page long, right? I don't have a 300-page rule book. Lots of them have different ones. So if you take nothing from this commentary on the recognition that, we all have dreams about what we want things to be, but then they come out and they're not the way we want them to be. Instead, take that energy into thinking what you want to be able to do for your own game. Every quarter on the Sly Flourish Patreon, we have the Patreon Q&A. Every month, patrons can ask RPG-related questions. Every Friday, I answer all of the current questions, and some of those questions I bring here to the show so we can dive in deeper. Puka says, once again, I dragged my feet taking one of your suggestions, and once again, it seems you were right. By the way, if you want to get a question on the show, you could do worse than starting off a question like that. Wow, if only I'd listened to you sooner to your brilliance, Mike. But I didn't, and now I did, and it turns out you were right. Great way to get your question on the show. Real easy hack to get on the show. Let's get past that. The question is about dreadful blessings. I ran a boss last night, and as everyone was very high level, he got 5. The party monk burned through those with one stun attempt after another, and everyone was glad when the final Dreadful Blessing was expended. Here's the question. Legendary actions. Do these require the use of a Dreadful Blessing too? I would think not, but I don't know. Do you just spend them on legendary resistances and break through force walls and so forth? Current monster has current legendary actions and 3 legendary resistances. With Dreadful Blessings, that monster has 1 legendary action and N Dreadful Blessings, or 2 Dreadful Blessings and nothing else? Good question. So, easy answer to this is legendary actions and Dreadful Blessings are totally different. So however many legendary actions a monster has, it still has those, whether you give it Dreadful Blessings or not. The only thing that Dreadful Blessings replace are legendary resistances. In that case, it's punitive to have both. So you remove legendary resistances and replace them with Dreadful Blessings. Real quick summary on Dreadful Blessings. Dreadful Blessings is sort of like Legendary Resistance. It is a token that you put out in front of the player so they know you have them. You usually give about 3, 4, or 5 of them out there, depending on how powerful the characters are. And instead of only using them to succeed in a saving throw, you can use them to break the game in pretty much any way you can imagine. You can reset breath weapons. You can give extra actions. You can shatter walls of force. You can break the rules of the game by using these tokens to do so. You do so in order to keep the threat of a single big monster high, regardless of the crazy powers that the characters have. So it is a great way to make a monster really behave in the fiction of the game as it should, and not completely remove the agency from the players to be able to do that what they want to do. So the easy answer is, but they do not replace legendary actions, because legendary actions are actually baked into the math of the monster already. If you look at how much damage a monster does, that damage is spread across their normal actions and their legendary actions. So if you remove legendary actions, the monster's going to be doing like half of what it normally does. So no, legendary actions are there. So that's the first point. Second point, though, is the stunning one. I would bet you're running 2014 D&D, because that's when monks could use Stunning Strike multiple times in a turn. And here's a trick with Dreadful Blessings. Legendary Resistance you have to use the minute they fail a save. You have to decide if you're going to use it then. Dreadful Blessings you can hang on to, and you could let it be stunned. And here's the neat thing about a Dreadful Blessing is you can use it to keep the pacing of the game going. So one of the reasons why Legendary Resistance feels bad is because it immediately negates the thing that the character did. Dreadful Blessings are a way for the character to be able to get part of the value of what it did, what the character did, and still make sure that the monster is hitting as it should. So Stunning Strike is a very powerful ability, because on a normal monster, it's just taking away the actions of a normal monster. But against a big boss legendary monster, those monsters are supposed to account for about 4 characters. But if you stun it, you just did 4 characters worth of actions that disappear all at once. With a Dreadful Blessing, you can turn that stun back into something that really only affects it as 1 character. So what you could do instead is, like, imagine that the monk goes over, does a Stunning Strike on a legendary monster with Dreadful Blessings, and succeeds in the stun. And the monster is stunned. And now they're getting their free extra attacks and stuff like that because it's stunned. And then at the beginning of its turn, it uses one of its Dreadful Blessings then and breaks the stun at that point, and then gets its full range of attacks. So the character's got the benefit of having it be stunned for some of the turn. It maybe got rid of a legendary action or 2 because it was stunned. And then it didn't take away all of its main actions because it was able to use the Dreadful Blessing to break it. So think about using your Dreadful Blessing as a moment of pacing to say, I want it to be affected by things. And I had a player who brought this up specifically, where they used a wall of force to protect an ally from getting smushed by I think it was Demogorgon. I think they were fighting Demogorgon. And they threw up a wall of force, and Demogorgon was smashing against the wall of force. And I let that wall last 3 turns until they had enough to be able to heal the character. And then he smashed through it using a Dreadful Blessing. And the player said, I was really happy that you let the wall of force stick around for a little while, knowing that you could break it with that Dreadful Blessing whenever you wanted to. They appreciated the pacing because it felt like I wanted to get some value out of that. We had a specific thing we wanted to use it for, but we didn't want to make an invulnerable shell that could never be broken because of the Dreadful Blessing. So that's the real advanced trick of Dreadful Blessings, is using them to give the right amount of agency to a player for the thing that they did, but still make the boss powerful, and also use it to keep the pacing of the game oscillating, that good things happen, bad things happen, good things happen, bad things happen. That's the power. So you do not have to use them like you're using Legendary Resistance. You can use a Dreadful Blessing, hang on to it, and use it when you need it in order to do a thing. And then here's a real powerful example. So let's say your monk goes over and does Stunning Strike against the legendary monster, and hits and succeeds, and they fail to save, and you say, I'm going to use a Dreadful Blessing and succeed. Okay, I do it again. Okay, I'm going to do it again, succeed. Do it a third time. Okay, and you're like, okay, well, now I burned 3 of his Dreadful Blessings down. I'm done. And you're like, good. Now, here's what you could do instead. You stun it. Okay, wow, we all get free attacks with advantage. The fighter's hitting it with advantage. Everybody's piling on it. Then bang, on its turn, it says, I use 1 to break out of the Stunning Strike. I use 2 to fly without provoking opportunity attacks. And I use a 3rd to recharge and use the breath weapon for free on everybody who was there. The dragon flies up and breathes down and does 110 points of breath damage on everybody that was surrounding it when it was stunned. You know, they get all we get to hit it with advantage and everybody's doing great and they're doing crits. Oh God, we all got breathed down for a bunch. So you get to really create these super swingy, fun bits of story. And it's the same number of Dreadful Blessings. You use 3 to escape the stun, but you use 3 to do this other thing instead, right? You get to oscillate and vary the pacing of the game by when you use your Dreadful Blessings, which is what makes them so powerful. So Puka, I hope that answered your question. Thank you again. And as always, you know, my suggestions are just suggestions. I'm not always right. I am often wrong. And even right, I'm just bringing up ideas and we're all trying them out. So, but still, if you want to get on my good side, you can say, hey, I did a thing and you were right. Astray says, currently working in a homebrew world and creating the big bad evil guy. It's going to be a false Hydra that has been using a cult to spread it across the world. Do you have any tips on how to build the cult? So if you're not familiar with a false Hydra, you want to go do a DuckDuckGo search or a Kagi search for false Hydra and read some of the articles about a false Hydra. A false Hydra is essentially a monster that when it eats somebody, everybody who ever remembered that person no longer remembers them. So you're essentially creating these vacuums in people's minds every time it sort of eats somebody. I had the opportunity to write a false Hydra-like monster for MCDM in one of their issues of Arcadia, for example. And the fun bit is if your group is good with it, and it's a little trick to it's a little tricky to get consent for this kind of thing without showing what it is. But you're kind of gaslighting your players, because one of the things you're doing is you're changing the reality of the world on them, and you're changing what their character knows about while they're playing. So you might have, for example, like an NPC the characters have been with, and then the NPC says, I'm going to go scout something, and the scout disappears, and then they're like, what happened to the scout? And you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. You never had a scout, right? And they're like, we didn't? I thought we had a scout that was there, right? No, I don't think so. And because players barely get half of what you're talking about anyway, they're going to be very confused. But the reality is there's a monster that's doing this. So a cult that follows a false Hydra. So you could think of it a little bit like the cult of the Nameless King in my book, City of Arches, available in the Sly Flourish bookstore. You should check it out. There's a link in the show notes, and you can pick up City of Arches in the bookstore. The Nameless King was a super powerful ruler whose entity, whose whole existence was removed from people's minds when they were cursed to get rid of them. And it meant no one knew who they were. All visages of them were burned, but holes of them existed all throughout the world. You would see spots on murals where part of the rock would be broken away, or you'd read a book and there were parts of the pages that were burned out. So you would have these things that were remnants of it. And there was a cult who was like, obviously there was something there and we need to know what it is. So a false Hydra cult would sort of be the same way. There would be people like, I used to know a thing and I don't know it anymore, but I want to find out what it is. And the only way we can know what this thing is by if somebody never knew that this thing existed, we need to get them to have known of its existence and then not know it again. So there's a lot of like mind-bendy stuff that you could do. But essentially what you have is a cult where instead of having a focal point for the cult's worship, the focal point is empty. It's like a black hole, right? And they all know it's there. They all know the hole is there. They have, visages of like the cult's all worshiping, and there's like a blank spot in the center of it because nobody knows what it is, but they know it was there. They have like, the names of the lost, but the names are all empty, right? Like the list is empty because everybody kind of disappears. So I think it could be kind of a fun way of twisting it, is to have this group that once knew that they knew a thing, but know that they don't know it anymore. So that's a real trick. Really, false hydras are tricky things to run. And I don't know that I've ever ran. I think I ran one once, only kind of, I've never really truly run it. I have written for it before. And you can see that in, I don't remember which issue of Arcadia it was, but one of the issues of Arcadia for MCDM, I wrote for that. But really fun kind of situation to think about. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, please consider subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is totally free to sign up. You get a free adventure generator for signing up, and you get a weekly RPG-related article sent directly to your inbox, along with links to all of the other work that I do. You can also support me directly on Patreon. You can do things like ask me questions on the Patreon Q&A, or check out the 5e Artisanal Database, or see the first chapters of the new project that I'm working on, or get 20 additional scenarios for City of Arches. Join our Discord server. Lots of stuff you get for being a patron. It's a very good deal. So I highly recommend it. Of course, I would recommend it. What else am I going to do? And you can pick up any of my books, including City of Arches, Forge of Foes, Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master, and more at the Sly Flourish bookstore. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.